Welcome back to the Be Fit podcast. I'm here with Eva Claire Synkowski, a longtime mentor of mine, someone that I've looked up to for a very, very long time. EC, aka the MVP, aka the People's Champ, aka the 800-gram goddess. Guys, welcome EC to the podcast.
Oh my goodness, the MVP. Wow. Yes, I'm so happy to be here and good to see you, Connor.
Great to see you as well. Yeah, so people didn't think they know we're going to start off with the MVP conversation, but we may get to that later. I'm so excited, and every time that I see your posts, every time that I see everything that you're doing, it is incredibly motivating to me because of the simplicity that you bring to a topic that so many people want to nuke in the terms of like just overthink. And so I'm hoping that the people that are listening to this podcast will be able to hear from you some actual, things that they can incorporate in their diet, in their nutrition to help them move towards a path to getting their markers towards fit.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's funny. My drive for simplicity actually comes from my first career in environmental consulting, where we had to convince jury trials, not convince, I guess prove is the better word of, who's responsible. And one of the first things I turned into my expert witness, it was like a page long about, the data. And he's like, what is this, a mystery novel? And so he was master of clarity. And so if I bring any clarity to the nutrition space, it was because I worked for someone who was an expert at it for 7 years. So yeah.
And it's amazing because the level of education that you have and in the depth that you went to understand what you're talking about to then, in my opinion, from working on you with the CrossFit seminar staff, it was like the more knowledge you were getting, the simpler you were making it for people to get on the right track.
Yeah. I mean, in the CrossFit space, Coach Bergner is a huge motivation for that. I remember one of my early days working with him and just being so impressed with how simple he made it, those complex lifts with the snatch and the clean and jerk for everybody. And he was so encouraging that everybody could do it regardless of their skill level. And I think there needs to be more of that in the nutrition space. Like there's a lot of this, talk about kind of the physiological level, which is interesting, but it's like, hey, let's distill this down for people who aren't experts so that they can really go apply this and make some change.
Yeah. And I think distill it down for people that aren't experts, but also it's like, have it make sense to someone.
Right.
It's like, cool. You start talking about hormones and all this stuff and they're like, okay, so can I eat this? Is this what I can eat?
Totally.
And you're like, yeah,
totally.
Yes, no, or maybe not as much as this, more of this.
Totally. Yeah, that's what I want. And I use the tax example all the time. That's what I want from my accountant or my tax guy. Like, just tell me what I'm paying. All right. Like, I don't want to know anything. Just tell me what I'm paying. Right. So yeah, for sure.
So let's dive into the 800-gram challenge. What was the driving force behind that? And, what results have you seen from it? And how is it where it's kind of, from my standpoint, it's what I see as kind of the staple for what you're doing or giving to people. And even though you have all of this knowledge between, every other source of food, what's behind the 800-gram challenge?
Yeah, I would consider that sort of how people know me as a brand, or maybe the intro program for me. It's certainly not the be all and end all of nutrition, but a lot of people are looking for kind of quick tips and easy things to do. And the 800-gram challenge certainly meshes with that quite well. And so the 800-gram challenge is to eat 800 grams by weight. We're talking about weight of fruits and vegetables of your choice every day. And then you continue to eat whatever else you want. So you pick the fruits and veggies, potatoes are in there. All types of fruit are in there. And so you pick which ones you like. Doesn't have to be all broccoli, get to 800 grams. And then you continue to have other things in your diet. Now, how did that come to be? Well, it didn't come looking at my own diet, which I think is something that gets mixed up a little bit in the nutrition space. There's a lot of people who put out diets that they came up with on their own. And didn't really test it on other people, where really we'd want something that has been tested across a large number of people, or at least, we have evidence that people are doing it besides one person, right? And so that 800-gram number actually came from a study where they were looking at, hey, how many fruits and vegetables do people eat? And then what happens to them in terms of death and disease? They were looking at risk for like cardiovascular disease and stroke and cancer and just all causes of dying. And no surprise, the 800-gram number is where the risks of all of them went down. So when people ate 800 grams of fruits and vegetables each day, their risk of cancer, stroke, cardiovascular disease, and all causes of dying decreased. And so I saw that study. I was like, that's a really interesting idea. Now, they weren't posing it as like, hey, here's a new diet. They were just looking at risk as researchers do. And I was like, that's really interesting. What if I try to eat 800 grams each day with no other rules and restrictions, just see what happens? And so this was summer of 2017. I was still doing my master's in nutrition and functional medicine. And I played with it for 6 months because I thought it was a cool idea, but it's like, well, what are the calories represented here? And how does this shake out across many weeks? And what are the macronutrients and what are the rules? Like if you put a diet idea out there, you better be ready for questions. So you got to play with it forward and back. And I did. And, Nicole Christensen, our friend at CrossFit Roots, I roped her into it. I was worried because I'm 6 feet tall. I was like, is this actually manageable for other people? So testing out for a bit, thought it was like just a really cool, simple way to remove some of the dogma and get people focused on adding a healthy amount of fruits and vegetables to their diet. So I kind of publicly launched it in 2018 and the response has been overwhelmingly positive. I think this is more so than I thought, like just the mental shift people have. Like so many times with dieting, people think about, oh, shoot, what I can't eat, right? And now I'm telling you what to add and I'm not taking anything away. And so I think people really appreciate that. But some of the results, for weight loss, but I think most of them come out of people just like better energy in their fitness and their workouts, better recovery, which is just not surprising given the nutrient density of those items. So yeah, those are all kind of the benefits that I've heard and seen so far. And it's, again, I just want to stress to people, it's not a panacea. It's not going to fix everything. But when you're looking for a great way to kind of change your diet for the better, I think it's a really great place to start.
And you're kind of talking about, you referenced, hey, yeah, there's some weight loss, there's some better feeling energy. But I feel like an important piece to that is the psychological understanding of food now, where if your goal is to eat 800 grams, now, and again, just for someone who's like, what does 800 grams mean? Meaning you get a scale, you take whatever you're going to eat for fruit, and you weigh that. And the amount of weight in grams you consume, and you have to in anything there. So it's not 800 grams of carbohydrates that you have to eat via fruit. Right. And you're not counting the peel that you're not consuming. It's whatever goes in your body. If you're like me, you eat it all anyways. But like I think the psychological piece is so important there because a lot of people go into a grocery store and they're like, what shouldn't I get? Mm-hmm. And when you start to give yourself this option of, hey, I'm hungry, what should I eat? I have to get these amount of grams in. So let's get some whole unprocessed food. And because it's easy with fruits and vegetables, you're not in the aisles. You're not in like these are vegetable chips, so it's just like just eat the vegetables in this. I think it takes down that barrier of, oh my gosh, I'm on a diet and I have to eat these, or when I'm hungry I can eat this. And people are relatively more satiated from eating something, even like a fruit and vegetable. With the fruits, something that has a little bit more sugar content, something that feels better, rather than being like, oh, I have to eat. Now here's 5 pieces of kale, 4 pieces of spinach that are in there, and it's like, So I think too. I mean, I'm sure you've seen results in the psychological part, which could then potentially add in more things to a diet to get people moving even further in the right direction.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, half of the battle in nutrition is kind of momentum and being able to build consistency of habits, and so that's part of it too. It's like, let people have some flexibility with a simple solution. And just to back up a little bit, I'm glad you mentioned weighing on a scale, which is certainly part of it. But for your audience, that's like, okay, well, that's a nice idea. Not doing that. 800 grams is also about 6 cups, and a closed adult fist is about 1 cup. So that's another way that you can go about it. Like a good size apple is about a cup, right? So you can do kind of 6 fists a day and you can get there as well. So no excuses if you don't have a scale and you're interested in trying. But yeah, the flexibility is huge too. I think there's a lot in the nutrition space that's like, you can only eat locally sourced raspberries in season, and it's like, okay, give me a break. You can have the banana, you can have the orange, you can have potatoes. They're very healthy. People will be like, oh, I was at an airport yesterday, and so I had to do 2 apples and a banana. I'm like, that's fabulous. That's so healthy. There shouldn't be this less than idea of these items, and that it doesn't always need to be kale and broccoli. And yes, those are wonderful and healthy foods, but you can be very healthy eating peppers and carrots and the potato or something like that. So I just love the flexibility. I think it's almost like a gateway diet, just getting people back to eating a good healthy diet because they have so much freedom and flexibility of what they're picking.
That's awesome. And it's interesting too when you're like, oh no, I ate 3 pieces of fruit. And you look at you're like relative to, especially in an airport, it's like you're
Right,
hard pressed to you're hard pressed to find those items.
Right.
And it's like
Totally.
the closest I can get is, you look in there and you're like, all right, so there's some dried mangoes and there's only a little bit of everything crap that's added to it. And so it's like, okay, this is what I'll take. So yeah, I mean, relative to other options, and I've seen you talk about that too. It's like you go into a gas station, it's like, what are you eating? Why is it so easy to overeat? If these foods are relatively healthy, I mean, it's not like, it's like rat poison is right next to the potato skins. But if they are relatively healthy, how and why is it so easy to overeat these things?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's just a lot of misconceptions about things like potato and fruit and that, they're so high in carb and so high in sugar. And it's like, okay, maybe relative to asparagus, but not relative to like the cinnamon rolls or the potato chips and all that stuff. And if they really were the root cause of our chronic obesity epidemic or our chronic disease epidemic, then we would see the gas stations and, all of the different checkout lines being lined with bananas and potatoes. And instead, it's all of the processed stuff. And that processed stuff, it's fine. You can have some in a healthy diet. I'm certainly not here to tell you that my diet is all salmon and broccoli, but it's just so calorically dense. Every time you take a bite of something like chips, they can have 5 times the amount of calories that you would find in fresh fruits or vegetables. And so, yeah, it's just like, guys, the foods that we're overeating are the processed ones. And so anytime you make a choice that looks more like a whole unprocessed food, you probably are doing a better service to your diet overall in terms of getting your calories in line and also getting all those nutrients in line, like the vitamins, minerals, fiber, et cetera.
I love the post where you have a plate of food and you're like, this is this many grams of XYZ.
Right.
This is also this. And I had that discussion yesterday when someone came up and, someone in our office brought in like cookies and donuts and stuff. And I kind of relaying the same message that you're saying as they looked at the cookie and they're like, oh, that's like bad for me. And it's like, well, you could probably get the same amount of carbohydrates from that as you would your salad, but you'd have to break off a crumb and eat it. It's they're so calorically dense that
Totally.
that's how easy it is to overeat. And very rarely are you ever eating a serving. Very rarely it's just like, oh, yep, just having this little piece. Oh, good to go. It's just so easy to have 1, 2, 3 of them. And now it's like, okay, you just consumed 100 grams of carbohydrates. How do you think that's going to derail your homeostasis of hormones and how that's going to affect it? So,
yeah, and that's actually, I would say, what I have to battle a little bit with the 800-gram challenge. There's a massive disconnect for people between understanding that fullness does not equate to calories consumed. And so, of course, with nutrition, lots of people are interested in weight goals, and weight goals comes down to eating fewer calories than you're burning in terms of weight loss. And a lot of people, when they do the 800-gram challenge, they feel very full. And that's true. They're filling up on fruits and vegetables. The difference is they just have a very low caloric density. And so they actually end up eating fewer calories overall compared to the chips and the cookies. But then they'll think, well, I didn't eat that many chips and cookies because I don't feel very full. And it's like, yeah, and the calories could have been equal or more then. So that is a little bit tough with the 800-gram challenge because sometimes people will feel so full. I'm eating so much food is what they think. Oh my gosh, I'm eating so much. And it's like, you are in terms of volume, but not in terms of calories. So that is where I have to spend the most time in terms of education, because again, these processed foods are so calorically dense that you can easily eat several hundred calories and not necessarily feel very full. In fact, a pint of ice cream can be 1,200 calories. And so even if you just do half of that, you can have 600 calories. You're not full after a half pint of ice cream. My goodness.
and it's also very difficult to have a pint of ice cream and eat half of it.
Incorrect. We typically go for the whole thing. So there you are, maybe at 1,200 calories. And to do that in fruits and vegetables, you would need to have close to 1,200 grams of fruits and vegetables. So a 1.5 800-gram challenges to get that many calories.
It's 12 fists.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Now, in the terms of like being full, right? That's something that, in my opinion, it's such a subjective term that I feel like people are so, and there's this like stigma of, you shouldn't be hungry. That's like bad, or it slows down a bunch of different things. And what I do regularly is intermittent fasting because of the simplicity of it and because it works for me, knowing it's not going to work for everyone. But a lot of times people are like, well, aren't you hungry? I'm like, probably, but I've done it so long and I understand kind of the ebbs and flows of what's actually happening where I'm going to be consistent here. And you can't get that by doing it for a couple of days. So what is your thought process on, like, if someone's like, oh, I was so hungry I had to eat? Like, what is your thought on that?
Yeah, hunger is tough. You are going to be hungry for weight loss. I think there's this idea that you can lose weight and it's never going to be difficult or challenging. It's like, no, you're probably going to be hungry. Now, it doesn't mean ravenous hunger all the time and can't think straight ever, but it does mean you're probably going to have mild hunger more days than not, because that's what happens with hunger. Your body is trying to keep yourself at the current weight that it is. And so it's trying to cue you into eating. So you kind of have to accept there's going to be hunger. I also agree with you, and I don't want this to come off the wrong way, that I do think there's a little bit of getting used to it. And that is something that I like about fasting. Now, again, for your listeners, I'm not talking about extreme caloric deficits where totally under eating and being unhealthy. I'm not talking about that practice at all. But it is definitely okay to be hungry. It's okay to skip a meal periodically, just as we've overeaten meals before. I can attest to that. We can also skip a meal. The body is remarkably resilient. And so I do think, especially in the beginning, trying not to do a big caloric deficit and just accepting mild hunger and sitting with it for a little while, it does actually get easier. Like, oh yeah, I can still keep doing emails or and we're not going to maybe go start our intense CrossFit workout like that, but we can certainly continue to do some stuff around the house or whatever and have mild hunger, and it's going to be okay. Yeah. And I agree. I have a love-hate relationship with fasting. I do think it simplifies the equation, but that is something that I took away from it that I really did enjoy. And that was just sort of this flexibility idea that, like, the body's resilient. I don't have to have 5 perfect meals a day. I can skip one and it's going to be okay. I can live with a little bit of hunger, all of that stuff.
And I think I've seen success in fasting with people I've recommended it to, not prescribed, recommended it to, because a lot of the people that I've worked with that I've been able to be 100% there for are these touring artists. And so when we have these specific meal times where I say, I know I can control every factor of what we're eating from noon until 8. And then beyond that, I mean, these men and women are playing shows from midnight to 2 in the morning. And at 2 in the morning, if your diet is keto, it's going to be very, very difficult for you unless you planned ahead of time to do all of these things, or if your diet is, X, Y, Z. So in those moments, if you are already feeding, whatever it is appropriate for you, or, you as an organism, like, your diet is to not eat. So you have that availability. And for like weight loss and for, obviously extended periods where there's all these other things that are going on, if you have stored fat and you don't have a low body fat percentage, if someone didn't have a performance goal that was tied to intermittent fasting, I'd be very nervous to introduce them to that, because people will start to realize very quickly, if I stop eating, I'm going to lose weight. Like, that's going to happen. Right. But when all of a sudden your performance is affected by it, and these other things, and it's like, hey, we need to bump this up more. Maybe this window is too big for you, or maybe the meals in between weren't good enough. But I mean, to your point there, it's like, yeah, maybe going a little bit without eating isn't going to be the worst thing in the world. And the simplicity of it, very similar to the 800-gram challenge, is like, I'm going to eat this. And then it's almost like, good luck trying to continue to overeat as if you were eating for 24 hours, or good luck trying to overeat when you eat 800 grams of fruits and vegetables. Like, simplifies it, because you're not going to be as hungry in that.
Totally. Yeah, I agree. I think it can be a good, simple solution. I think the reason why I kind of have a hate relationship to it is I think people think it's something magical beyond controlling quantity, and that they think that there's all this additional benefits to it beyond controlling quantity. And it's like, no, the benefits are because you're controlling quantity. And if that's how you do it, sure enough, go for it. But it's not like a new mythical answer.
What are your thoughts on extended fasting?
Yeah, so a lot of this stuff I'm assuming you're talking about it, especially for like longevity and health reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when people talk about autophagy and like the things that are happening as you continue to go through.
Yeah, so like The problem with some of that stuff is especially it's going to be derived from animal studies where the animals are not exposed to the same stressors that we would be exposed to in a longer life period. So like living in cages where they're not exposed to germs and having to have a fully functional immune system, living in cages where maybe they don't need the bone density to be able to support themselves. And so there are some things that it's not a real environment, and we need to make sure that we're fueling adequately for our health systems to work as well. And so this is where I think it's a little bit lost in the caloric restriction research. It's like we can't extrapolate from mice in cages to humans in the real world being exposed to lots of different stuff. We want to be really careful to do that. And so we just don't have the evidence to suggest it's going to be as effective for humans. And what we do have with the human evidence is that it looks to be the magic for fasting comes to getting the right quantity in line, which if you do it by fasting, great. If you want to do it by cutting calories, great. If you want to do it by the 800-gram challenge, great. All roads lead back to controlling quantity is certainly important, but there's not an additional benefit above and beyond for caloric restriction, especially once we start looking at, limiting nutrients that are going to be necessary for health in the long term.
That's really interesting thinking about it like that, because that's obviously for, in like layman's terms, or someone who's like, oh, I like fasting because of XYZ. They're not gonna they're not gonna gain access to that information or seek access to that information, because what's given to you is, someone who has a podcast that's, has some titles in front of their name. Unlike me, there's no titles in front of my name. I just get smart people to talk on it, but. And it's like, here's all these benefits, and like, oh, okay, but that makes complete and total sense. And I think sometimes when you hear that, these people have access to do these extended periods of fasting over a weekend where they're in their homes and they're not, they're not having to go through work and they're not having to do this stuff. And you have, your hot sauna and your cold plunge, and you have all of these things supporting it. And then you're pushing it out there to be like, hey, go for it. And then you get someone who's on a 48-hour fast who's like trying to drive to work and is sitting there and not able to complete emails, and other things are going on. So it's really interesting.
I think we also have to be careful, and this happens all the time. We can't take short-term studies and extrapolate to long-term results. So this would even be your example of the person who does the 3-day fast and has a successful experience with it. We still don't know what that looks like for them 30 years in of doing that. And this is similar to like, people will look at like an insulin spike after a meal or a muscle protein synthesis increase after a workout. And then they'll be like, okay, this means I'm going to add muscle mass, or this means that my insulin is too high. It's like, no. We want to know if it adds muscle mass. We have to look at muscle mass in the long term. We want to know if your insulin is too high. We have to look at fasting insulin in the long term. We can't look at 4 hours after an event. Same thing with cold plunges. People will look at cold plunges and be like, oh, it decreases inflammation markers. And it's like, okay, maybe it does in the short term, but does it change my performance in the long term? That's what we care about, right? We care about performance markers, health markers, weight markers, and not today in this moment, but like 30 years from now, I think, or 5 years from now, I think, right? And so that gets a little bit lost too. Now, I do want to be clear on the fasting thing. There are some people, and this is true with the cold plunge, there are some people who do those endeavors more for the mental side of it. Maybe it's like a fortitude thing or a difficult thing. And I'm not against that. I just think that there is some stuff put out there as though there are these additional benefits when those really haven't been proven.
On top of that, I see a lot of this happening with the THC, cannabis, CBD stuff coming out. And it's like, hey, this can really help. But we can't say that because none of it has really been proved. There's not enough research and documentation on it. Do you have any thoughts down that alley of like the CBD, THC, cannabis world?
Yeah, I probably should do some more research on that. But from what I recall, like it's only been approved for like 2 medical cases by the FDA. I think it's like drug-resistant epilepsy, if I have my memory right on that. In other cases, there just isn't the evidence for it. And then especially with things like CBD and CBD supplements can be useful in certain cases. I certainly don't want to say that no supplements are never useful, but supplements are very unregulated. And so with CBD supplements, but any supplement really, oftentimes there's issues where what you think you're getting is not exactly what you're getting, either to the levels that they say it is and or potentially other contamination. And so we just don't have the evidence that CBD is like widely useful for a lot of the things that it's being touted for. But admittedly, I haven't looked again in the research, at least for the last year or so on that. So I do want to go back to that. But like I said, I think it's only been really cleared for drug-resistant epilepsy, but I might have that wrong.
One of my favorite things that you and I used to do was talk about the labels of supplements. And I remember because I was just like this like pre-workout fiend. I used to love on strength days. Like if it made me feel like my skin was on fire, I wanted it. And you'd read the labels and like the first ingredient was like super specific scientific good stuff. And you're like, what? And then under it was a bunch of stuff you couldn't read. But yeah, in like the supplement world, is there anything that you're like, I mean, I know it's not like, right? Try it, see how you feel. There's like long-term stuff, but is there anything like, hey, I'd lean more towards this and potentially lean more away from this?
Yeah, I don't ever recommend any supplements broadly for the most part. Just I think a lot of our goals can be achieved without it. From a performance standpoint, I put two, what I call in the worth a shot bucket. And those would be caffeine and creatine. There is enough evidence to suggest that people can have performance improvements with them. Not everybody, but the overwhelming majority of people do see some improvement when the training and the dose is correct. And one of the things that happens with, especially with supplements that I'm looking for is, I don't want to say this is like a standard that's put out there in the science, but like when I'm looking for effects, I want to see that the supplement gives me at least 5% performance gain. So if somebody's bench pressing 100 pounds and then they take the supplement, can they then press 105 pounds? Because a lot of times supplements will show a quote significant effect, as we know statistically, but it might be that person who benched 100 pounds now is benching 101. And you're like, okay, that's interesting. Did they just get more sleep that day or what's going on? Like that is such a small effect that I don't know that I'd tell everyone to go take that thing. So I look for performance improvements at least 5%, because to me, we're getting outside of what would be considered a typical placebo effect. And so caffeine and creatine especially is higher than 5% in many, many studies. Caffeine is closer to the 5-10% range. And so those would be ones that I would have people consider looking into, especially if they have really specific performance goals.
That's interesting, obviously, because those are the two things that I'm currently doing for any of the research that I've done. It almost seems as though creatine is one of the only things where there's scientific proof of, or a scientific fact, which is different than a law or a actual fact of 100% of the time, but to be proven to help with recovery, to help with muscle growth and all of that. But now it's like, okay, cool. Someone hears this and like, caffeine and we have creatine. So I'm going to get, whatever the GNC recommendation is, and I'm going to drink 4 Celsius a day and EC, and I'm going to get fucking jacked. Is there a process of maybe vetting this may be better for you than this in the realm of caffeine and creatine?
Yeah. Well, I liked your kind of first point. Let's even before just vetting the supplements, but like, hey, if you're not eating adequate levels of protein, which I consider 0.7 grams per pound of body weight, I know a lot of people recommend higher. I think 0.7 grams per pound of body weight is great for a lot of people. If you're not getting consistently good amount of fruits and veggies, if you're not training, consistently at least a few times a week, if not more, if you're not sleeping enough, okay, the caffeine and creatine is not where we start. It's not going to do it.
Dang it, EC. I thought I was onto something.
Like just taking the caffeine and creatine just doesn't add muscle mass. Like we need the training stimulus to be there, but then we also need the sleep to be there to have the training stimulus, and we need the protein so that the training stimulus is doing something, right? Like all of these things fit together. So, and that's a big thing. Like I don't want to keep harping on that, but it's like 77% of people aren't meeting the exercise recommendations of aerobic and strength training exercise. And then we have 90% of people aren't eating enough vegetables in the US. We have over 70% of people are eating too much quantity. So I think a lot of times we do jump to these caffeine and creatine ideas before some of the basics are in place. So thank you for letting me go on my diatribe about consistency. Creatine, I think there's a lot of hype about the different supplements, but really any creatine monohydrate is generally fine. I guess there's always a concern about contamination. So you can look at consumer labs or something like NSF certified to help you kind of guide you towards a brand, but you don't need a specific type of creatine like creatine monohydrate is fine. And then same thing with caffeine. There is a new marketing push out there that I've seen that's like natural caffeine. I'm like, what does that mean?
Is that different than
caffeine
organic caffeine?
Right. It's like, okay, it doesn't matter, but whatever. So those are fine. What you will see in a ton of pre-workouts that people will swear by, that I know that you've probably dabbled in a few of these, they'll have all this other stuff in there. And then if you look close enough, there will be caffeine. And that is why people feel the effect and actually maybe see a performance benefit. It's not all the other stuff, but it's in a ton of pre-workouts.
And a significant amount when you really look at it. When you're like,
Can be,
okay,
for sure.
you know, if I'm like, you know, I don't want to drink too much coffee because I don't want to have too much caffeine. And it's like a regular cup of coffee, depending on who you are, how you're preparing it. It's somewhere between 80 and 120 milligrams of caffeine.
Totally.
But a lot of these are like, we're talking like 250 to 300 milligrams of caffeine per scoop. And so when you feel like you're going to run through a brick wall, you're like, well, yeah, because your body is, you know, you just overloaded it with, you know, and is that good? Is that bad? I don't know.
Well, it's funny. There'll be all these energy drinks and they're like B vitamins. I'm like, guys, it's the 250 milligrams of caffeine. It's not the B vitamins.
What is your thought then? And here's something that I've been dabbling with, because I've graduated from I'm taking, you know, the total war or the annihilation Punisher supplementation, but I have started taking just straight beta alanine. And I feel, again, this is just, I take it, I train. Yeah. I've been feeling how I feel like when I work out. I feel my cardiorespiratory endurance earlier in the workout is working. I don't feel, you know, if I don't properly warm up and I don't get my heart rate to spike multiple times and come back down, if I don't do that, but I'm taking beta alanine, I don't feel that like that panic feeling when you're 2.5 minutes into a workout and you're like, uh-oh, heart rate's really high right now. I have seen and felt some success, but I don't know enough information about it to tell someone, hey, I recommend this, or here's what's happening. I'm like, well, there's ants crawling in my face, and then I feel like I work out better.
Yeah, the itchiness. Yeah. Yeah, beta alanine, it does get recommended frequently. I think you probably know as well, Matt Fraser has recommended or was a strong proponent of beta alanine. And yeah, the research on beta alanine, it doesn't really push performance consistently over 5%. There are certainly some studies that will be in the few percent range of improvement performance. And so sometimes I just like to qualify it for people. It's like, okay, we might be talking about like 6 to 10 seconds off of a mile time that generally a lot of us could improve just by running more.
Right.
You know, we don't necessarily need the supplement. But yeah, it is the mechanism of action is such that it can potentially improve your tolerance at high intensities. And so it does make sense in the way that you've described it. Now, what I would encourage you to do, and with all of your listeners, is this is how so many things go. Well, I tried it and I feel better. Feelings are a great metric of feelings, and that's about it. What we want to know is, did performance change? And what's difficult about performance is there are so many factors that come into play: technique, sleep, other things in your diet, such that you'd want to try to, and this is why we do controlled trials to actually look across lots of people, blah, blah, blah. But for you, N of one experiment, you'd kind of want to, I don't know, do at least a month where you try to keep the other stuff consistent. You try to keep the diet consistent. You try to keep the sleep consistent. You do enough workouts where you say, okay, I use beta alanine for 30 workouts. Now I'm going to repeat those 30 workouts without it, trying to keep my diet the same, trying to keep my sleep the same. So now we're looking at 60 days of doing this so we can really see, okay, with beta alanine, 20 of my 30 workouts went better. And without beta alanine, only 10 of my 30 workouts went better, right? Or something like that.
Yeah, okay.
Which admittedly is just really hard to do in real life. You know, it's to be consistent with diet and sleep and training for people. And this is why I just encourage people, especially once the research says beta alanine performance improvements might be few percent, 1-2%. It's like, I think you just probably need to train better and sleep more. But I don't want to discount it because there are some studies that show some slight improvement. So that would be how I would go about kind of evaluating it.
You see, I don't think people want the hard truth here, okay? People want to hear, you take beta alanine, you're going to win the CrossFit Games. Matt Fraser took it. He won the CrossFit Games. Right. Correlate? Maybe. Causal? 100%
It's crazy,
not.
though. People will have expectation effect from supplements. Like, for example, the power of Matt Fraser telling somebody, I take this supplement and I know it improves my performance. That fact regardless of what's happening like in a cell aside, that alone, that expectation effect can improve people's performance, which is crazy. The brain is so crazy. And so I do like to remind people that I think Matt Fraser should take beta alanine or whatever his routine was because he believed he should take beta alanine. The jury is still out of how much that really mattered for his performance in terms of like, was this working on a mechanistic level? But like in the application right now, somebody at that type of level is fighting for 1%. If they believe it's working, they should keep doing it. But we then have to just check our context a little bit and be like, okay, me as, just this normal person living my life, trying to stay healthy and fit, does 1% off of my mile time matter relative to the other things in my life? I probably just need to train harder and focus on like good quality diet,
That's such a great point. And especially with when you talk about the mental side of things where, as my previous military training and training for the CrossFit Games and all of this stuff, it was like, they're like, it's 99% mental, whatever. People who haven't gone through it and like, well, that looks pretty fucking physical to me. This is pretty much all it looks like. But I relate it to when I ran the Boston Marathon and at mile 14, Reebok, not when I wore a bottle service girl.
I was going to say,
this is when I had normal shorts on.
Okay.
The team at Reebok, they had a station where they were passing out like the Cliff Bar GUIs or whatever it was. And at mile 14, I remember you were like halfway through and you're like, okay, this sucks. Why did I sign up for this? I'm an idiot. And we start going through and this cheering section starts like erupting and they're following all of us because it was Spencer, it was Pete, it was myself. I think it was just the three of us running. And it was just cheers erupted. And from there, I didn't eat any of the Cliff things. Nothing physiologically happened. But that next 3 miles were faster than any of the miles. And I felt unbelievable. I felt so good running through that. My hip flexors weren't as tired, like my feet. And you're like, what happened? What is that mechanism? So just to say like, hey, if you're taking this and you feel like it's improving, then you should do that. But that like brain belief, it's like, how do you bottle that? How can I sell belief to someone? I guess probably a lot of people do that, but interesting.
It is. It's the placebo effect and it's real and it is valuable. But the problem is I can't recommend things because I think some people will get a placebo effect. That's a little bit weird. It's like, oh, there's not really evidence for this, but maybe you're one of the people, cross my fingers, that will get a placebo effect.
And that's
what a lot of stuff out there is. And people can get effect from things just from the belief in it, which is crazy and also awesome that it happens. But we also just have to check ourselves like, okay, I feel better, but is my performance actually improving? Because that's in theory why I'm taking this.
Right. And even on the negative side of things, I've been hanging out and talking a lot with Chris Irwin, who we both know. And even his like on the mental health side of things, when he started believing that, a lot of these things that his brain was telling him from combat experience, from his military experience, and then started physically feeling these things that kind of his brain was telling him or how he describes it. It's like, it's not just on this level, but you can also do it on another level where in like the negativity side of it to actually start to believe and then feel those things as well. So it's incredible to think about the brain as like as powerful of a tool as it is.
Totally. And they see that with nutrition too. It's actually like called the nocebo effect. But people, for example, who believe they have gluten sensitivity, they have different symptoms when they're told that they're eating gluten, even if the item doesn't have gluten in it. It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. It's like the brain is telling them, okay, this is quote bad for me. And therefore they develop the symptoms. Now the symptoms are very real. I like people to understand that. I'm not doubting people's symptoms. What we don't totally understand is why it's happening. Is it truly the gluten or is it the belief about the gluten in some cases? I know it's nuts. Sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, we have no idea what's going
on. But what a point that I think that you proved and drove home really well with the beta alanine and how people can be like, oh, there's these significant studies. And I go, and myself, like, sure, I'm doing like my own, like quasi unofficial clinical trial, but there's way too many, there's way too many factors in it. There's way too many, it's like, what are the denominators that are common in this? And I remember reading an article and they had this controlled study where there were 60 people that shaved with clippers. And then there were 60 men that shaved with razors. And after however many years the study was, the people who shaved with razors, they had an increased risk of getting cancer relative to the people who shaved with clippers. And so the study reads, shaving with a razor greater increases your risk for cancer. And then people are like, I can't shave with the razor.
Yeah.
And you're like, whoa, like,
Right.
who were these people? Jeanette, like, was it the same person? There's all of these things where it's like, and I guess I don't blame people who aren't looking into it for reading and believing and understanding these things and being like, oh, I can't do this. I don't want to get cancer. And you're like, well, how is that? Like, why is that, allowed or what's a way to try to like sift through that type of information when it comes to nutrition?
Well, that's tough. That's kind of like asking, about headlines, really. People will kind of read the headline, and I just caution people that like you're just already mentioning, there's a lot of factors that go into all of these disease outcomes, that it's very rarely ever one thing. In fact, one of my principles, it's never one thing. I said ever rarely. Sometimes there might be a genetic component that really is the driver there, but there's so many factors that honestly, these headlines, because they have to get our attention, they focus on one factor, and we often aren't getting the whole picture, kind of like you're saying. So I think try to keep that in mind, is that headlines media is driving attention. They're not driving accuracy. And that maybe you're getting part of the picture, not the whole picture.
Yeah. Are there any sources that you trust and recommend? Are there any books where you're like, hey, this has been really beneficial? I mean, outside of your obviously extensive formal education on this type of stuff, but someone from, for instance, like the Connors of the world, to be like, hey, if you read this might give you a little bit better insight or direction.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of looking over here at some of the books I have. I do like the book, The Hungry Brain by Stephan Guyenet. It's talking about kind of what drives our motivation to eat, which I think people will find interesting. It is a little bit more technical. It is certainly mainstream, but it is a little more technical on the end of mainstream. I also like the book Flexible Dieting by Alan Aragon. I think that just does a really great job of kind of a non-biased approach. It is for a little bit more of the fitness crowd, which I think aligns well with you all, but it's just very kind of matter of fact. This is what the evidence says, and it's not written in a highly technical way. I think it's very accessible. And I'm sure there's a couple others that are just not coming to mind at the moment. I do like Lane Norton, Fat Loss Forever. It's an ebook. Gets, again, a little bit technical on the science, but has a lot of great application in it as well. And I think all of those are great resources for people.
I recently almost finished reading a book called Bad Pharma. It was one of those ones that, like CrossFit recommended. And it's really, really interesting, like very much so. And it goes into like the studies, and it goes into trials of things, and how nothing is necessarily needed to be reported, and how there's been trials of one thing that went really, really poorly and they didn't report it. And then 50 years later, they did the same trial, the same things happened. It was like all of this stuff that makes you, upset at the pharmaceutical industry and at, this isn't actually what happened, or they did this control test not against a superior supplement, but one that they know doesn't work. And so then they could say against others. And it's just really, really interesting in that. But in my application, it's like, okay, well, maybe I just don't need a lot of supplements. Like that's what I get from it. It's like great information for simple Connor, but like, where's the application? So I'd imagine the books you're recommending, there's like some, hey, here's something that can help you out.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's another book. Burn by Herman Ponzer does a great job on explaining metabolism in layman's terms. But they all do talk about the science a little bit, which people tend to like because they are confused a little bit with what they see. But I like all of these books because I think they're practical application for people of like, okay, now how do I go put this knowledge into practice? I think all of them have it for sure.
And I know for a long time when you were a flow master on CrossFit seminar staff, we were kind of preaching the zone. Really, it was like, hey, we want, now especially with the nutrition lecture changes, I actually just gave it this last weekend, and it was, hey, here's a bunch of different ways. We just want you to start somewhere. What is I would imagine did zone or experience zone for a amount of time. What do you think for someone who's like, hey, what is a zone? Who's Dr. Barry Sears? How could I get started? What do you think are like the goods and bads from a diet like zone?
Yeah. I think what is best about how CrossFit approached nutrition, at least I can speak through 2017, that was driven by Greg, is that if you want to optimize performance, which again, the original intent was forging elite fitness, you have to have measurable, observable, repeatable data on your nutrition. And I 100% agree with that. I also think that a lot of our confusion in the nutrition space is because what drives the results people want are quantifiable data. Tell me the calories, tell me the macronutrient grams, tell me if you're hitting the right amount of magnesium, tell me if you're hitting the right amount of fiber, but no one wants to weigh and measure their diet. So here, that's the data that will give you the answers, but yet it's kind of at odds with our culture and how we want to live life. But yet that is the answer. What we want comes from the numbers. And so that's what's great about the zone is it does have people take data on their diet. Now, in full disclosure, I think the whole block system, it creates a level of complexity without utility. Like, hey guys, we all work in macronutrients and calories. Why don't we just use that? Why are we going to come up with another system that supposedly is easy, but now we have to memorize and manage the conversion between the two? I don't totally get that, but whatever. From a conceptual standpoint of, hey, we have to weigh and measure our diet, I think it's 100% dead on. I just don't think that everybody wants to do that. And I think that's, also, I'm guessing what CrossFit is recognizing now of like, hey, there's other ways that maybe we can get at this endpoint without all of that work. But that is what's great about the zone. It's also, I disagree with this Dr. Sears that there's this magic ratio of 40, 30, 30 in the sense of, some optimal hormonal response. But I agree that a balanced macronutrient diet is quite sustainable and good for performance. It's just that it doesn't have to happen at this precise 40, 30, 30. That somewhere in the ballpark is going to be a wide enough strike zone for many, many people doing CrossFit or CrossFit type training. So there's some things there. So there's some tenets there that I love. I think some of the details I think can be let go or just done a little bit more cleanly.
Yeah, and funny enough, at lunch, because we have to, we talk in reference to zone. I had a participant be like, "Hey, will you just kind of break it down for me?" I'm like, sure. So, we have 973 here, and like you're going to want to know just some general guidelines on what's going to happen here. So it's like, so what would be one block of carbohydrates? And looks in the manual. It's like, okay, so whatever, half banana, and then for protein, and then when I go to fat, he's like, well, isn't there fat in the egg that I have for protein? And you're like, yeah, but we're not going to count that towards. And then so yes, there are now, I think as far as like a baseline and starting point, and especially with macros, that was like the very hard conversation when people are like, well, I have this app and it just gives me like all of them, everything very precisely. And you're like, that's cool, but and then but so like the that is, I think, obviously the best way to really optimize, to get to, and again, with the audience that we're speaking to, there's people that are like 800 gram challenge. I can't wait to start that. And there's people who are like, I've been, I'm very, very good at that, but I'm trying to figure out my performance, and performance doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. Or there's some people who are like, I want to get stronger, but I still want to look like this. And at first, when I first started CrossFit, it's like, don't give a shit about what you look like. Oh, it's all about performance. And so you're like, well, I kind of want to stay in this area. Is that possible? Is when you go to like a system of starting to weigh and measure. So like weighing the food is kind of, I think, a great step in it. When you talk about the 800 gram challenge, now you just put it on a scale and you're like, this is what I'm going to eat. But then obviously the amount of grams and all that stuff from any of the apps, what is a good baseline for someone to start? They're like, hey, I really want to get to the optimize. What do you think is a good way for someone just to start?
Yeah. To be honest, that's why I developed what I'm now calling my 3 pillars method. But I do have people go through the 800 gram challenge, develop consistency there. I then have them basically do lazy macros, which is they continue to do the 800 gram challenge and then they hit a protein target. They're doing all of these things, what I consider on the Post-it note method. They're just writing down the weight of their fruits and vegetables. Then they're writing, big contributors towards their protein target. They're getting that dialed. They are doing that for months. They're on their fruit and veggie train. They're on their protein train. And now they're ready to optimize. And believe me, some people will take more than months to do that because habit change is hard. Then and only then I would have people start to record everything. And there's lots of reasons for that. We talked about the psychological component. There are so many people who, as soon as they start to record, their behavior just goes out the window. It's like they're now just super restrictive because they see the calories at the top. It's like, this isn't what you eat. They have these ideas of what they should be eating. What you think you should be eating is one of the biggest roadblocks or limiters for people's progress. They have all these preconceived notions about what those numbers should be. Oh my goodness. So I try to build a lot of habits before we even get to that stage. And then, like I said, it doesn't fit with a lot of people's lives. A lot of people don't want to do it. And so that's why I have this lazy macros idea. It's like, maybe I can get there. Maybe we can start to see the performance gains enough, the weight loss gains enough, and not do all the freaking weighing and measuring. That if you just track on enough protein in a day, enough fruits and veggies in a day, then it turns out we don't have enough room for too many beers.
Right.
We have room for a beer. We don't have room for 5 beers. So that's another reason why I go through the progression. It's like, what's the least amount of work I can do with somebody to get the goals you want? And if we do have to get to weighing and measuring, it is an awesome tool and I love it. But a lot of times just out of the gates, people don't have experience with it. It doesn't fit with life. It typically goes horribly wrong, in my opinion. And I've stopped doing it with clients. We do not weigh and measure everything out of the gates.
And I'd have to agree with clients I've worked with, although, and I'm sure, there's the exception, not the rule. I have seen someone that has, whether it was waking up and looking at themselves in the mirror, or whether it was someone who couldn't get off the ground trying to play with their kids, or some sort of life event that happened where someone said, I'm changing this. And they've come to me and they're like, I need to change.
Ready.
Give it to me. And you're like,
Right.
All right. And 100-pound weight loss stories that, like getting in the right direction. But there are fewer of those than there are even, immense amount of successes from hundreds of other people. But there are those people who are ready to change. And I think there's that, they finally reach that point in life. And it's usually the extreme. It's not someone who's like, hey, I'm generally like middle of the road, like things are going well, I'm going to make this big change. It's usually someone where they have that scare, or their doctor's like, yeah, you're going to orphan your kids soon if you don't figure your shit out. And then
yeah. And I would just also sometimes, though, even with the extreme people who are ready to make the change, is sometimes what we see is like extreme change oftentimes leads to like a short-term change because they haven't built up enough of the time to make that truly a habit, right? So they're like, I'm going to 1,200 calories. And it's like, yes, they can lose weight there. And yes, maybe they do it for a few months. And then it's like, okay, this is not livable. And they haven't built up the habits at a livable number of calories, right? And so that's why we see a lot of weight regain. There's other reasons for weight regain too, but it's just sort of like, this is even with some of those people, I still like to pump the brakes a little bit because half of the battle is creating the habits that will stick for life, not just creating the change, right?
I didn't really think about it like that, where let's say someone is consuming 3,500 calories a day. And they say, I'm going to eat 1,200 calories a day, because that's going to fast track them to lose weight. And I don't care, as you know, and you've preached before, like if you're eating less calories than you're burning in a day, like you're going to lose weight. Like there's no other like magic that goes into it. And sure, there's some other things as far as like kind of like what exactly you're eating or at what times, or at what levels. But then, yeah, cool. It's 4 months in, and then it's like, all right, this is no longer sustainable for me. Sure, they saw that like, the 50, 60 pound weight loss, but I've definitely had clients that have had that. And then it's like, I've fallen off of it because then they fall back to 35 as opposed to going, I'm going 2,200 calories a day and I'm going to slowly start to lose weight. And then in 2 years, it's 100-pound weight loss. But in their sense, they're like, this is me. Like, this is what I'm doing from here on out because it is sustainable. Do you think there's anything? Do you think there's anything to that jumpstart though? Do you think there's anything to be like, hey, we're gonna hit this to get you motivated, to get you excited about, holy crap, I've lost 20 pounds in 2 months, and then maybe pull the gear into fifth and be like, all right, instead of 1,200, we're going to 17 in this. The results are going to be a little slower, but we're going to continue to make it. Do you think there's any benefit to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways to skin the cat. I'm sure people have had success with that. I think I've probably just defaulted now to like, guys, we're going slow and steady. Only because I've worked with a lot of people who have gained weight back after weight loss. And I think I kind of said it on a podcast recently. I think you could argue that weight loss is almost successful in our country. It's that weight loss maintenance is not. And again, there's other reasons for that, our food environment, hunger, appetite cravings, all of that stuff. But still, it's like, okay, we're not really good at keeping the weight off. So I just default to like slow and steady because these need to be rock solid habits if we expect to do this in the long term. And I just think when we kind of go about it in a slower pace, that's what we're doing. We're just building the habits to keep doing it.
And I'd imagine that's where, probably from that is where the 800 gram challenge kind of started as, here's a really, really simple baseline. Do you have any baselines even before that? Are there ever people that you work with that are like, I mean, we're talking like TV show, like the, My 600-pound life, where it's like, hey, we got to, before we even change, is there like a movement sequence that you pair with it? Is there something where it's like, it's obviously there's ways that it need to be individually based, but to the masses, to the masses of 14 people who are going to listen to my podcast, probably more of it since you're on it, but to even give them more to like, hey, here's even a way to start to turn the tables.
Yeah. Obviously movement can help, sleep can help, all of the lifestyle stuff and whatever they can do there that feels sustainable. From a nutrition perspective, I hate to sound like I have one trick in the bag or a tool in the bag or whatever, but I do pretty much start with the 800 gram challenge. Now, that doesn't mean everybody hits 800 grams. Some people just figuring out what fruit to eat at breakfast is going to be what we do for weeks, right? And so you definitely can scale that. But to me, it's like such a central component to the diet. It's such a way to feel full in a modern food environment. It provides so many great nutrients that I just don't know. Like other people will recommend starting with protein first. I just don't feel like I get the same return on investment in terms of the overall diet shifting as I do with fruits and veggies. That's a bias. That's my belief. And so that's why I start there. But yeah, you certainly can scale the number and figure out what this person can do towards that number. Because admittedly, 800 grams out of the gates for some people is going to feel like way too much and they're not interested and won't stick with it either.
Well, I've done the 800 gram challenge a couple of different times. One when we did it as a unit at Reebok. And there were definitely times where I was like, all right, I'm going grapefruit to kick things off today because, I need to get some of these, what do you call it? The weight belt of the 800 gram challenge.
Me. Yeah.
But, so there were times where I'm like, man, like the end of the day, I'm like, I got to do this. Everyone else is doing it. To where the 800 grams was difficult, not unattainable. And the more you prepare and plan for it, obviously the easier it's going to be. But, in terms of starting off, if there, some fruits that you're like better than others, or you're just like, hey, let's just start going down this route.
Let's just start. I don't care if you're eating a standard American diet and you want to do 800 grams of watermelon, like, let's go. If you want to if you're eating a standard American diet and you want to do 800 grams of potato, let's go. Like, this is, I think, where people miss the mark in nutrition. They're always looking for this perfect. And it's like, no. We got to go. We got to start. We got to make change. And we got to make change where the person's willing to make change. Get the inroads, get the win. That's half the battle. You want them feeling the win. Now, I know what's his name? John Berardi, when he's still running Precision Nutrition, I think his first step with clients was something like take a multivitamin every day. And it was more for the psychological aspect of like, this is something you can do. And you've proven to yourself that you can do it. I still go with like a food change, in my opinion. But yeah, it's like, I'm not going to suggest strawberries. Maybe you hate strawberries. Like pick there's got to be something in the fruit and vegetable genre you like. So we're going to pick one and we're going to go with what you like. And then we'll just worry about tweaking it as we go. So yeah.
Do you recommend anything for water intake during this time? Or, I mean, I would imagine obviously if someone is poor with water intake, yet they start eating that amount of fruit and vegetables, it's obviously going to up the amount there. But anything with just regular water intake?
Yeah, I let people, for the most part, just go based on thirst, and combination of kind of a pale yellow urine is a great guide, in my opinion, those two things. I think giving out the numbers can be a little confusing because those numbers that we typically hear actually include the water in our food. And as you just pointed out, the 800 gram challenge contains a lot of water. So I have seen people make the mistake of like, I'm doing the 800 gram challenge and a gallon of water a day. I'm like, you are going to feel like a water balloon.
And going to the bathroom every 15 minutes.
Right. And I actually find that I probably don't drink that much water relative to some other people, but I also am very consistent with the 800 gram challenge, right? So this is where it's like, hey, drink to thirst, pale yellow urine, I think are some great guidelines for people that are easy to live by versus kind of X ounces or whatever.
I love how simple you keep it because it's like, you can get it started. And we were just, before we started recording, kind of discussing some people who, again, great information that you want to go above the top. And people are like, oh, if I fast and then I drink lemon water while I consume my blueberries and eat, a piece of toast, then it's going to optimize. And you're like, well, you ate 3 Snickers bars and a pizza the day before.
Right.
Like, let's not, as they say, major in the minors.
Sometimes I'm not sure, and that's one of the reasons I still really like doing, my master class. Of course, I like helping people and all of that stuff, but it's my reality check. Is what I'm saying actually working? Is this, because it's sometimes I'll hear these recommendations, who are their clients? I don't know who their clients are, but I feel my clients are very, at the high end of proactive individuals interested in their health, professionals, busy lives, demands on their schedules, and they're not worried about whether or not their lemon water is paired with their blueberries. We're just trying to get through the basics, consistency of fruits and vegetables, and not overeating the chips on the weekend or whatever it might be, right? And that's where over 90% of people are, and just need to keep hearing that message.
Well, I love like I said before, the simplicity that you bring, and it's interesting that you bring up Coach Mike Berdner, because I was blown away, one, by just everything that man does. When he came out for the training grounds, he was on the floor coaching anyone and everyone who was willing to listen. He was there for these CrossFit Games athletes, yet he's there for the 6:30 a.m. class, coaching people, doing strict pull-ups in the back. But that's what I remember specifically. And he helped me significantly. And again, it could be that mental aspect of Coach Mike Berdner's giving me coaching cues here, so this is where it's about to go down. But anything he was giving me was simple, things I could focus on, not nuking it. I know he has that information. I know he has it in him. But it was I remember on the jerk, just the simplest cues of patience and just jumping harder. And then it was consistent. And I broke through these barriers of that person who didn't have who had the knowledge without the ego to deliver it to someone who, if I didn't know anything about him, I'd be like, oh, that fit old man just really helped me with a couple of really cool coaching cues. But knowing that the knowledge that you have and your ability to distill it to help the masses and real help, not just, create a podcast about all these crazy things and everyone listens to it, but there's no action behind it. And so I encourage everyone who's listening to this, because we're just over our hour mark here. I encourage everyone who's listening to this is to look up EC, what's your Instagram handle?
Optimize Me Nutrition on Instagram and Facebook.
We'll put it in the notes section here, in the comment section here. But, to simplify it, try the 800-gram challenge. If you're an instructor, try this for your people. Even if it's not something where you're like, I don't really give nutrition advice. It's cool. You can be the quarterback and hand it off right over to, the 800-gram challenge, hand it off to EC to be able to get people moving in the right direction. That's really what we want. But just to commend you on how incredible it is, one, having you on here, but two, knowing your level of knowledge and how simple you've been able to break it down to. It's just so cool.
Well, thank you. It's really fun to be on, to see you. And I hope your listeners try some fruits and veggies in their diet.
I hope they already are, but odds are some of them probably need another reminder. But if you need anything need to contact EC, I'm sure is there DM, Instagram, email, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Reach out, website also optimizemeenutrition.com. Lots of resources there. I'm on social, as we mentioned. And my podcast is The Consistency Project, but yeah, dig in.
Well, again, thank you for your time coming on here. One, obviously, as someone incredibly knowledgeable in not just the nutrition space, but the fitness space, but two, also as a good friend. Always good to see you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And you guys can always follow us at Big Night Fitness on Instagram, and then my handle at Connor T. Murphy if you want just random nonsense. But outside of that, thank you guys for listening, and we will see you guys next week.